All right, diving into some deep waters today. We're looking at a blog post by Jon Rasmussen.
Oh, yeah. He's pretty fascinating.
He really is dedicated his life to something he calls the re-empowerment of the feminine, all about shamanism and gender. Some really interesting ideas.
I think you'll find it's definitely a unique perspective, yeah. Blending shamanism,
Yeah.
especially teachings from the Kuro tradition in Peru,
Yeah.
with observations about the society today.
And right off the bat, he brings up this idea of Pachacuti,
Mm,
describes it as like the world turning right side up,
right.
with the feminine, taking more central role, which he thinks is super important for, well, for everyone, really.
And what's really interesting is how he connects that Pachacuti idea,
Yeah.
the world turning right side up, to what's going on in the world right now.
Yeah.
Like he says, the problem we're dealing with, environmental stuff, social injustice, all the conflict,
Mhm.
he thinks it's because of what he calls fear-driven masculinity being so dominant.
He doesn't hold back either. Calls out like anyone he sees fitting that description. Bullies, greedy people, people who just want power to control others.
Yeah, and he doesn't just point fingers, he
Mhm.
goes deeper. Says this kind of masculinity, it comes from fear. Fear of being vulnerable, fear of losing control, fear of, well, I guess not being man enough.
Huh.
And he says that fear, it makes men try to dominate, exploit others. Men, women, even the planet itself.
That's pretty intense. But I don't know. Isn't it a little generalizing to say that all men driven by fear are like bullies or greedy?
Right.
Plenty of men out there who maybe, have some of those fear-driven traits, but they're still trying to be good people.
Oh, for sure. And I don't think Rasmussen's saying every man who feels fear is automatically a bad guy. It's more like he's seeing a pattern.
Okay.
Like when fear isn't dealt with, acknowledged,
Yeah.
it tends to turn into something destructive. And he
Yeah.
sees that happening on a big scale, societal level.
Ah, okay. Like systems and institutions built on fear, kind of perpetuating all this bad stuff.
Exactly.
So, where does shamanism fit into all of this? Can you give us a little background on like the basic ideas, especially how they relate to all this gender stuff Rasmussen talks about?
Well, shamanism at its heart, it's about connecting to this spiritual side of reality
Mm-hmm.
and then using that connection to heal, to transform.
Mm-hmm.
It sees everything as connected, emphasizes living in harmony with nature. And what Rasmussen does, he links all that to how we understand gender.
Interesting. How so?
Well, he sees the feminine as fundamentally tied to nature, to intuition, creativity, nurturing energy. And he thinks shamanic practices can help us tap into those qualities, both inside ourselves and out in the world.
Okay, and this is where it gets really interesting. Rasmussen says the world actually needs more courageous men.
Yeah.
What's he mean by that? How's that different from this, fear-driven masculinity?
He contrasts them pretty clearly.
Yeah.
Courageous men, they face their fears, they're open to being vulnerable, and they actively support the feminine, not because they have to, but because they really get its value, its power.
Okay, yeah, I see the difference now. But I think a lot of people might hear men supporting the feminine and be like, what does that even mean? Sounds kind of vague, maybe even condescending.
Right, right. But Rasmussen actually gives a lot of practical examples in his writing,
Oh, like what?
like encouraging women to go for their dreams,
Yeah.
really listening to their perspective
Yeah.
and challenging anything that tries to hold them back, systems, beliefs, whatever.
He talks about men needing to recognize and honor the feminine within themselves, too, right?
Exactly. He thinks real courage for men, it involves embracing their own sensitivity, their intuition, their nurturing side, all those qualities that society often tells men to suppress, because it's not manly enough.
Yeah. And that inner work, it's really important. Because Rasmussen, he believes that men, until they like really deal with their own issues, their own wounds, they're just going to keep projecting that stuff onto other people, especially women.
And that's where all this shamanic healing stuff comes in, right?
Exactly.
You mentioned that he mostly works with women and gay men.
Why is that? And what about straight men? What does he say about working with them?
Well, he's pretty open about the fact that, yeah, most of the people who come to him for healing are women and gay men, people who, I guess, connect more strongly with the feminine.
Okay.
He thinks a lot of straight men might resist this kind of work,
Yeah.
because it challenges everything they think they know about being a man.
So is he saying he wants to work with straight men more?
Yeah, he has talked about a growing need for him to help straight men on this path, to understand and support the feminine. He sees it as crucial for creating a better world, a more balanced one for everyone.
I can see that. But what about this idea of asking men to support the feminine?
Yeah.
Couldn't that, like, reinforce these old ideas about gender roles and expectations?
Yeah, it's a valid point. But Rasmussen's really clear that he's not saying men should be subservient or take on this like paternalistic role. He's talking about a partnership,
Hmm.
based on mutual respect, understanding, appreciating what each gender brings to the table.
Okay, that makes sense. So what about the rewards? What's in it for men who embrace all of this? He talks about, like, living a richer life than you can imagine. What's that even look like?
He doesn't give you a step-by-step guide or
Eh.
anything, but he talks about like deeper connection, feeling more emotionally fulfilled, and having a sense of purpose that goes beyond just, ambition and success.
So it's not just about, like, doing the right thing for women or society. Men actually benefit from this too.
Exactly. Rasmussen says embracing the feminine, it lets men experience a wider range of emotions, become more intuitive, more compassionate. They can connect with something deeper, find more meaning.
That makes sense. But I think some men might hesitate about all this, embracing feminine qualities. They might think it'll make them seem weak or less capable, especially in a world that still values, aggression and dominance.
That's interesting because Rasmussen actually talks about that fear directly. His real strength. It doesn't come from suppressing your emotions or denying parts of yourself. He uses this great analogy like wearing a sword on your lap, ready to use it if you absolutely have to, but not, walking around waving it all the time.
I like that. It's like having power, but being in control of it, not letting it control you.
Right. And that connects to how he sees the feminine. It's powerful, but it's also protective. He compares it to like a volcano. It can be incredibly destructive, but it also creates new life. It renews.
So it's not about denying masculine strength. It's about balancing it with feminine wisdom and compassion.
Yeah, exactly. And he thinks that balance, that integration, it's crucial for building a world that's both just and sustainable.
It seems like Rasmussen's saying a world guided by the feminine isn't this, utopia where everyone's hugging trees and singing kumbaya. There's still room for strength, for assertiveness, even for, I guess, what we traditionally see as masculine energy.
Hmm.
But it's about finding a balance.
Right. He keeps coming back to that balance. He says the feminine, it's not hierarchical, it's nurturing, which is like the opposite of that fear-driven, power-hungry masculinity he's criticizing.
He also talks about being able to tell the difference between, like, fear-driven masculinity and courageous masculinity. But how do you actually do that, like, in your everyday life?
He says men need to look at their own beliefs, their own actions, ask themselves, where am I acting out of fear? Am I trying to control or dominate? Am I hiding my emotions or denying parts of myself?
He says look at examples of courageous masculinity too, right? Like men who are already out there doing this.
Totally. Men who are challenging the old ideas about gender, speaking out against injustice, men who are working to create a more equal, more compassionate world.
And it sounds like it's not just about, like, these big heroic acts. It's about the small choices we make every day.
Yeah, the little things that show we're committed to honoring the feminine.
He even talks about men needing to step in when they see a woman being threatened or disrespected,
Yeah.
using their strength to protect and defend.
Right. And that's important. He's not saying men should be passive or avoid confrontation. It's about using your strength wisely, responsibly. Don't let fear make your decisions for you.
This is a lot. It sounds like Rasmussen's asking for a pretty big change the way we think about gender and power. Challenging, like, really deep-seated beliefs.
It is. It is.
And is it even, I don't know, is it even possible, or is this just, like, wishful thinking?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah,
And
but-
Rasmussen, he knows this change isn't going to be easy.
Mm.
It needs a fundamental shift in how we think,
Mm.
both individually and as a society. But he's actually pretty optimistic.
Really?
Yeah, he points to like cultures in the past, that lived in more balance with the feminine, with nature. Says we can rediscover those ways of being.
Right. Like, he often talks about how things are now, it's like a detour from a more harmonious way of life.
Exactly.
Like, we can get back on track, get back to that path that's more in line with the feminine.
Yeah, and he doesn't think it's just like a nice idea. He thinks it's essential for humanity to survive.
Wow.
He says this whole fear-driven, dominance-based way of being masculine, it's brought us to the edge of like collapse,
Mm.
ecological, social, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
He sees the feminine, empowering the feminine as the way to fix it, to restore balance, create a world that's, well, more sustainable, more just.
He uses that example of the earth, right? Like how it takes all our waste and gives us food, shelters us, warms us, lets us live and die without, judging us.
Yeah, it's a powerful image.
And it feels like he's saying the feminine has those same qualities, that nurturing, life-giving, unconditional support.
Right. And he contrasts that with how a lot of men have been taught to be in the world, to conquer, to control, to take what they want without thinking about the consequences.
And that's led to a lot of the problems we're facing.
You think so, yeah.
So where do we go from here? If he's right and we need this shift towards the feminine, how do we even start?
He gives a lot of practical suggestions, like reconnect with nature, listen to your intuition, cultivate compassion, empathy, practice gratitude, appreciate the simple things.
He also talks about men supporting women, right? In their careers, creative stuff, personal lives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Encourages men to be allies, to fight for equality, to speak out against injustice, to make space for women's voices to be heard.
And he's not saying men should take over or,
Right.
tell women what to do or how to do it.
No, it's about listening, learning from women, working together to create something better for everyone.
So after all this deep dive into Rasmussen's work, I mean, it's given me a lot to think about.
Me too.
What are the big takeaways?
Well, it's a call to action, that's for sure, especially for men.
Mm-hmm.
We need to look at ourselves, our beliefs, how we act, challenge those harmful parts of, what we think it means to be a man. And we got to step up and support the feminine, not because we feel guilty or obligated, but because we understand how important it is, how powerful it is.
Rasmussen says, a world guided by the feminine, it's not something to be afraid of. It's not about being weak or soft.
Yeah.
It's about balance, about wisdom, about connection.
Yeah, and about embracing a way of being that's both powerful and nurturing, assertive and compassionate.
And in the end, he thinks this shift, it helps everyone, not just women. It's about making a world that's, more just, more sustainable, a world where everyone can thrive. Something to think about, right?
That's a powerful vision.
Yeah.
And one worth fighting for.
Yeah, it really is.